So, writing with sources, chapter 1. There's several things from this chapter that I want to make sure you really got a handle on. The book is very short, but it's very dense. He covers a lot of really important things really quickly. So I'm going to kind of unpack those. You will see some of the keywords written right up here in just a second, just to sort of emphasize some of the things you want to take away. And if you've watched this video after reading the chapter, it's going to make the quiz very easy for you to do well on. So just talking about why we use sources, we use them to verify information and make sure that our information is right. And news organizations have standards for like how many sources they have and how reliable those sources are, because what they're presenting is truth, or they're trying to make us believe that what they're presenting is the truth. And if they have multiple sources able to verify it, that makes it more likely to be accurate. And so it's obvious like how news relies on it, but it matters for other types of writing and communication as well. So you want to make sure that you have sources, they're verifying information for you, they're giving context, and then in things like research papers, you're sort of explaining the conversation that you're jumping into, and you're making it clear what other people have already said about this before you jump into the conversation, and then you will be doing something called taking a stance on it, which I'll get to in just a second. So first, you want to make it clear that there's sort of two different ways you're using data. Like you can just give the data itself, and giving factual data, like that's the information itself. And then another type of source is ideas about data. So the data itself, like the results of studies, the historical facts, the historical letters if you're doing history, all of those kinds of things are the factual data. And that's what you call a primary source. Secondary sources are when people respond to that data and tell you what it means and interpret it and make connections between ideas and stuff. That's ideas about data. That is secondary sources. So you'll see both of those concepts come up in your quiz that's going to review you on this chapter, but you want to understand that there's a difference there. There's like the data itself, and then there's the interpretation of the data. And both of those have a place, depending on the purpose of what you're doing. The stance is sort of how you respond to the information from sources. So you include the information from the sources, and then you take a stance. The three stances that the book gives you are yes, no, and sort of. So yes means, here's this information from a source, and I agree. The second, the no stance, is here is the information from the source, and I disagree, and here's why. The third one is sort of, and so that gives you room to qualify your response. Here's the information from the source, and here's some things about it that I agree with, but I would also add this, or I would change this. So it's where you kind of complicate the information that you bring in from the source. So those are the stances that you take. Anytime you include a source, there should be a stance. You should be including it to agree with it, to disagree with it, or to add on to it and respond to it in some way. Another thing that he talks about is using reliable sources. So you want to use reliable sources, like not just some random person's blog post or Facebook post or Twitter rant or conspiracy theory video on YouTube or whatever it is. Like you want to make sure that the information you're getting is reliable, it's vetted. Generally you talk about sources being either scholarly or academic. If that's one category, scholarly and academic, and then the other is popular sources. So scholarly academic has a vetting process built in where there's other people who are experts who vet that information, and they have to agree that it's been done correctly, rigorously, and things like that in order for it to be published. So there's a higher standard for the academic and scholarly sources. For popular sources, there's not necessarily that sort of vetting process, and especially on the internet, people can pretty much put up whatever they want. So you want to be careful about where the information comes from. If you find it in a primary source or a popular source, then you want to see if you can track it down in something that's maybe more serious, academic, scholarly, and see if they verify that information. The reason you want to do that, you want to know you can trust the information. You also want to be careful because sometimes people put stuff up on the internet and they have plagiarized, and you don't know that they are getting it from this other source. They're presenting it as their own, and then if you cite it as coming from them and it actually came from somewhere else, there are some professors who will call that plagiarism. So you want to be really careful. An academic source, a serious scholarly source, it's going to have already gone through a process to make sure that it's not plagiarized. popular sources may not have gone through that, so you may be getting information that actually came from somewhere else, and now you're citing the wrong place for the information. So that's also a reason to make sure your sources are reliable. What you want to cite, anytime the information is something that's not common knowledge and you find it from a source. Now, common knowledge, we'll get into it a little bit more in class, but the gist of it is that if it's something that a typical person might know without having to research it, it's just sort of a basic fact. The way I like to explain it, no one had to do work to bring that information to you, something like a state capitol or what color the sky is or something like that, where it's a fact and you might look it up, but it's something that no one's really having to do special work to bring that to you. They didn't have to do a study or provide analysis of someone's study or something to give you that information. That's something you call common knowledge. But if someone had to do some work to bring you that information or that idea, you want to give them credit for it, so you don't get in trouble. But it also helps your own like credibility that you are citing it. It strengthens your argument to be able to say other people said this too. So it goes beyond just not getting in trouble for plagiarism, and goes beyond giving credit to other people for the work they've done. It actually helps you too when you're citing the sources. So you're not really helping yourself to pretend you didn't get it from a source and to pretend you came up with it yourself, because being able to say you got it from elsewhere actually boosts your ethos. So those are the reasons you want to cite, and you want to make sure you cite whether you are quoting or paraphrasing or summarizing or using a term that they use or like some sort of organizational system, anything like that. You want to go ahead and give them credit. If you're ever not sure if you should cite or not, go ahead and cite. It's probably not going to hurt anything to go ahead and cite anyway, and then you don't have to worry that you forgot to cite when you should and that someone might penalize you for it. So those are like the big ideas from this first chapter. So the quiz that you'll see this week just reviews most of those concepts and make sure that you understand them. You can retake it if you need to. It's one that you have to like fill in some short answer questions on, so it will not grade automatically. So be aware that there may be a turnaround on getting the final grade on it. But from here, I'll send you on to the week wrap-up.